Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, at mail, mail.wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening.
Okay, and let's do a quick recap on something we talked about last week, which was the hay quality. So again, we know with the first cutting hay, typically is going to be lower quality than the second and third cuttings, and that's due to the maturity of the forages, plus when we can get out there and bale. Now, a low quality hay is going to have 5% crude protein, and a medium is 9%, good is 12%. The total digestible nutrients is going to be an indicator of both the starch and the protein quality. So a low hay quality will have 45%, medium 50%, and a TDN of 55% is good. So 12% crude protein, 55% TDN is good, and that's also going to be an indicator of how much that cow will ingest. So we were saying it's always important to monitor your cattle, your livestock's body condition score, whatever it may be. We could even talk about sheep, goats, whatever it is. The body condition score is going to be an indicator of the quality of your feed. And this is especially important because at breeding time, you want that livestock, if we're talking about cows, to be at a body condition score of 5 or 6. And to be able to reach that, you have to ensure that that cow is doing has a high body condition score at calving, because it's going to be very difficult to put weight on that cow while it's lactating. So one of the things that we did discuss last week was to be able to manage your farm and to be able to best utilize the hay that you have to do a forage test. And Karen was recommending to do a forage test 2 weeks before you feed, which is actually, it's a very good idea. And that way it kind of ensures that the quality of your feeding hasn't degraded since you last did your forage analysis.
But Dan so rightly pointed out, once your hay gets to about 10% moisture content, it's pretty stable. And so if you are storing your hay inside and protecting it from the weather, then you could potentially do your forage test much earlier in the year, and those results would hold true. Again, keep in mind, you got to know where your good hay is and where your bad hay is.
Right, and it really needs to be stored properly so that it doesn't get wet, so it doesn't get mold up or anything like that. So that's something that we kind of talked about that we thought maybe we'd share with you, and that would be of interest. Now, we did end the show talking about some poisonous weed, and Karen was pointing out that there's a lot of poison hemlock out there, which produces a very toxic alkaloid. And as long as you are making sure that livestock has good quality forages, typically it'll ingest the toxic plants less than it would if that's the only thing that cow had. Then something bad could happen, and the livestock could potentially die, especially for something like poison hemlock. And I think we did also talk about cherry trees and wilting branches producing cyanide gas. So watch those fence lines. Make sure that there's no down branches. If you do have trees in your pasture field, take the time to figure out what they are. Karen she'd be more than happy to help you with that as well. But knowing what you have and making an operational risk assessment plan or operational risk management plan, knowing what trees you have, what are the potential sources of toxicity in your livestock, that's the best way to mitigate any possible disastrous outcome.
Right, and while you are looking at what kind of trees you have, since Dan threw me that line, I'm going to grab it and run with it. One of the easiest ways to find out what kind of trees you have is to have a forester come onto your property and look at the woodlot that is around your pasture fields. Almost all farmers I have met have at least 10 acres of woods hanging out in the back, and why not take that land and manage it productively, just like you would any other area of your farm. Your forest is actually a great opportunity to have an investment, and you can reap rewards from your forest land by harvesting timber, by enjoying it for its aesthetic value, or for managing for certain wildlife species if you like to hunt or just like to go out and snap pictures of them. So there are a lot of great things you can do with that woodlot that can provide a return to the farm in more ways than one. So contact your local service forester, and they're called service foresters in West Virginia. I think they're called service foresters in Ohio too, and Pennsylvania as well. So there are a lot of forestry people out there that can help you figure out what to do with that forest land, and don't just let it sit there and be covered in grapevines and fall down and get eaten by the emerald ash borer. Take an active stance for your forest management and have a plan. So just like you're going to have a plan on how you're going to feed your cattle, hopefully you have a pasture rotation plan so that you are best utilizing your pasture fields, but also have a forest management plan so that you can best work with the trees that you have and improve your timber value while also improving the health of your forest land. So that's just my plug for healthy forest management. And if you have questions, please contact your closest forester and get a forest management plan. You won't regret it.
Will not regret that one. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into some nasty poisonous plants here. One that's actually popping up about now that is a summer annual is your black nightshade. Black nightshade is poisonous to all classes of livestock. It's an erect branching summer annual, short-lived. The mature fruit it says erroneously been noted as being poisonous. So the fruit itself isn't poisonous, but the vegetated leaves are. So that's why it's so bad with the livestock, obviously, because they're worried more about the leaves than anything else. Young leaves are alternate waxy, tingy purplish on the underside, and they have petioles and stems that are purplish looking. It has a slender taproot. Basically, the nightshade, it almost reminds you a little bit of a tomato type plant, but actually I think they are in the same families. But the black nightshade is one that's also poisonous, and it's a summer annual, so it will be producing around this time. Horse nettle is one that is also in this family, and that one is actually it's a rhizomous perennial, so it has the underground rhizomes so it doesn't always reproduce by seed. It can reproduce by rhizomes as well, and it comes back every year because it's a perennial. If you see black nightshade, you can get really good control with black nightshade through chaparral. Forefront does a great job, and Milestone does a great job for black nightshade. Some other good products, but that don't give as much control as those three, are glyphosate and crossbow. Also doesn't do as good of a job, but we'll still give you an 80% kill.
Now, nightshade is one of those things that you can treat as with a pre-emergent herbicide, which may be helpful rather than waiting for it to come out full leaf. Now, we're probably past that time. Well, definitely past that time. But something to keep in mind if you do have an issue with it, that next year, even if you are treating it, you may want to try a pre-emergent herbicide as well to help prevent it from coming back. And for Eastern Black Nightshade, you're looking at your best results with Chateau or Sinbar. Again, anytime you're using an herbicide, you have to make sure you're using it at the right time of year, because using the right herbicide at the wrong time of year is going to get you the same results as using the wrong herbicide at the right time of year. You really need to identify your plant, know what it is, know what life cycle it has so that you can best treat it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Karen. Just stepped on her foot there. Horse nettle. Horse nettle is one that kind of looks like nightshade, except it's that perennial one. And horse nettle is the one with the white leaves that has the really sharp spine right there. And it's also very poisonous. But horse nettle would be one that 2,4-D does not do a good job at all in getting rid of. But Chaparral and Cimarron Max do work really well on it. You can also get good control with Metsulfuron as well, and Milestone does a good job in horse nettle. But if you're only using 2,4-D as a weed control, that's not going to cut it for horse nettle itself. And that is a poisonous plant. And that one actually grows out in the pasture fields. It's a low-lying plant. So any amount of close grazing will kind of promote growth of horse nettle. And as Karen was saying, in times of low forages, the animals might actually start eating the horse nettle, and then you're going to have problems in your livestock.
Yeah, Dan, you brought up a very important point, and that is your pasture management is going to determine how many weeds you have to deal with. By making sure you're not grazing your pastures too low, depending on the type of grass that you have, most of our cool season grasses, you have to stop before 2 inches, but if you have warm season grasses, you're going to want to stop grazing it much higher than that. So know what kind of grasses you have in which pasture fields and know how low you can graze them, and then monitor that. Overgrazing is one of the worst things you can do to your pasture field. Not only is it going to reduce the total amount of forage that the plants can produce because they're having to reset their crowns, but also you are going to increase the number of weeds that you have to deal with. So grazing down to 2 inches, if you're trying to promote your clovers, might be okay, but it's not something that you're going to want to do on a regular basis, and you definitely do not want to graze or mow below 2 inches in a pasture field.
Yeah, and honestly, I think even if you were to renovate a field, here's the old saying. The old saying goes, if you're not happy with what you have and you don't change how you got what you have, then no matter what you do, you're always going to end up with what you started with. So that management piece is really, really important in terms of being able to maintain something you want or get rid of something you don't want. Pasture height really affects a lot, but if you're thinking about grass is one of the best way to smother any type of weeds that are out there. Grasses typically grow taller than most broadleaf plants, with a few exceptions. But a dense, thick layer of grass is really going to not only increase your livestock weight, it's going to increase it's going to decrease the amount of input you need to maintain a good pasture as well. So, it's a win-win. Just like with good quality hay, the livestock your animals are going to eat more of that. So keeping things on a positive just makes things easier in the long run, and all the inputs. And it actually, by having a good plan and maintaining things at a good level, your inputs are going to be actually lower in the long run than they would be if you're just fixing things as they break.
Yeah, that is such a great thing to keep in mind. If you are having to deal with the same problem, the same weed every year, take a look at how you're managing that pasture field, and maybe by making a small change in how you manage it, you can drastically reduce the issue you're having. So say, for instance, you have a huge problem with Canada thistle, and it's your hay field, and you go out and you spray this Canada thistle, and it keeps coming back, and you keep having to deal with it. Well, maybe if you could fence in that hay field and graze it early in the year one time or multiple times, then you can reduce the ability of that Canada thistle, because the cows will eat it when it is young and tender, to actually be an issue. And also you're going to be replenishing that hay field with nutrients. The better nutrients you have in a field, the better forage you're going to have in that field, and the more likely it is that you're not going to have a weed problem. So soil nutrition, grass height, and timing for grass height removal is key to making sure that you are controlling a lot of the pasture management weed problems.
And if you are to the point where you want to get some chemical control of Canada thistle, there are a couple products that work really well. Forefront would be a selective herbicide for broadleaf weeds, or glyphosate. Those are the two that give you the best control. And there's one more here. Chaparral will also give you excellent control of Canadian thistle. Canadian thistle is a perennial, so it's one of those that you probably need to control and kill the root system because it does reproduce by rhizomes.
Yeah, and that just takes us back to the timing of your application. Canada thistle, you're going to get best control if you're using your herbicide right before it gets that flower bud on it. So right as it is starting its flowering process is a good time to treat it. Another good time to treat it is when it is at the end of the summer and it's storing up energy for next year and pulling things down into the root system. So you definitely want to try to get it before it flowers because you don't want those seeds to set. And if you are trying to do this organically, get out there and pluck those flower tops off and do not let it flower. So yes, I know it's a perennial, but you don't want it to spread, and that's just a control for spread. But you do need to kill that root system in order for it to not come back again.
And on top of that, let's say it's in a cornfield of yours, and you till. You do not want to till something that reproduces by rhizomes because what you do is you basically dice it up and seed it everywhere. Think about what kind of weeds you have. Think about what problems there might be. If you can't identify a weed, give us a call. We might ask you to send a picture. We might come out to visit. Either way, we'll be sure to help you identify a weed and tell you the best way to manage it. And that management of that weed is going to be dependent on your situation and how you manage your farm. So Karen said, organic farms have different things that they can utilize. Whether you till or you don't till is going to be a component of what type of weed you have and when you need to control it, or what you use to control it, excuse me. But even when you control a weed, it's really important in terms of whether you're going to get good control or not. Something like, I know an example that popped in my mind now is ironweed. Not necessarily a poisonous plant, but a nuisance plant altogether. But ironweed, it's the one with the purple flowers and then it starts looking all rusty. That's why they call it ironweed. But at the point where it's flowered and it starts rusting, it basically becomes essentially immune to all the sprays. And that goes back to the whole concept of lignin that we talked about with grasses. I think we started the show by recapping something we talked about last week where we talked about low quality of first cutting being typically due to the maturity of the grasses and also the capacity we have to cut, mow, and bale those grasses. And whether halfway through a drying spell, we get a rain shower. Early spring is notorious for localized rain showers, which will not pop up in any kind of weather prediction. So I know I was talking to a farmer a few months ago, I guess, and he was saying that back, it's we have all these tools now, but back in the day, the idea was always to mow at the front of a storm, because you knew it was going to rain, and hopefully after the initial cut in the rain, you had a period of dryness. And what we were saying was rain is going to be really detrimental to your hay quality after a certain amount of drying has occurred. So because they didn't have the tools that we have, weather predictions, all that kind of stuff, radar, they had to do things just by observation. They figured out what was good quality, what was not good quality. And, you write things down, you observe things, and you learn. You might not understand why always, but hopefully we're there to kind of help you figure out why something's working or something's not working. And I know I really got sidetracked there, but so going back to timing of spraying of weeds. Now, if you have a weed that's basically either drying because it's an annual, seed heads are already on there, spraying's going to do nothing, mowing's going to do nothing. But if you have a perennial plant that's still in vegetative state, what Karen was saying about the thistle, spraying it before it bolts up, that's going to be because there won't be a whole lot of lignin there, and the plant's really going to be susceptible to the spray. Just knowing your fields as well. So, when you're trying to deal with a specific weed and you know how to kill it, whether you want to spray the whole field with a selective herbicide or whether you want to spot spray either with a selective or non-selective herbicide is up to you. A lot of times, if you know there's a really bad thistle infestation in a certain field and you find one, you can bet that there's more than just one based on experience. And then you can decide whether you want to, if the timing's right, if you got the proper equipment, whether you want to spray or somehow manage the whole field, or you want to get things one at a time. But record keeping is going to be the way to figure that out.
Right. And just a side note, if you're going to bring a weed in for us to identify at the office, we do have a couple favors to ask of you for that. And one is very difficult for us to identify a wilted, crushed up leaf to identify the weed as a whole. So do try to bring in as much of the weed as possible, including the root system. The root system is often key to identifying things, especially if it's a grassy species. So make sure that you are just pretend like you're making a potted plant for your mother or mother-in-law, and you're putting it in a pot and you're bringing it into the office. So that way, and you don't have to have it in a pot. I'm just saying, leave some soil on the root system, because that's going to help the plant maintain its vigor. And so when we see it, we don't get a wilted pile of vegetation, but we actually get to see the plant as a whole, and it's going to make it much easier for us to identify it.
And on top of that, if you can give us more than one sample, that's also going to be good. There's going to be little nuances sometimes between the same species even, and just having a few different samples to look at is good. Also, pictures are great. Kind of, anytime you're going to pluck something, it's going to wilt. So if you can get a picture of it before you pull it out, and you give us multiple, plants, whether you've cut them or pulled them, and not pulling is the best way to do it for us, it'll give us a lot of information. So I know with technology out there, not everybody has all the technology out there, but if you can get your grandson like snap a shot with his phone or something, he or she will know how to send it to us. But that's also a lot of good information too. That way we can kind of see where it's growing, what the conditions are, what's growing with it. And something else, I guess we really didn't touch on this, but managing your soil is also really important in keeping those weeds down. We said plants or grasses are really good at smothering weeds because they typically grow taller. Now, if you have poor soil conditions, your grass isn't going to grow taller, isn't really going to be resilient, and those weeds are weeds because they grow well in stressful environments. So you're really selecting for the weed by not making sure your soil is in good shape.
Yeah, and as I've always said, a weed is nature's Band-Aid. If there is a bare, open piece of soil, nature is going to put something on that bare, open piece of soil. So as a grass manager and pasture manager, it is your job to make sure that you put what you want on that bare piece of soil. So if you see that your forage is getting a little thin out there, make sure you do a seeding. You can mow it down to about 2 inches and use a no-till drill. I know our conservation district rents them. So if you have a no-till drill, then you're ready to go. If not, contact your local conservation district to see what kind of tools are available for you to use. But make sure that you do keep a good heavy seeding of the item that you want to grow there, because nature will put something there and it might not be what you want to grow.
Just to kind of touch on a few grasses that are so these are the grasses that are not suitable for close grazing. So as Karen was saying, if you are grazing and you know that you have alfalfa, all-site clover, bird's foot trefoil, red clover, and white ladino clover, those are not typically good frequent grazing type legumes in this case. For grasses, a festulium, meadow fescue, orchard grass, perennial ryegrass, reed canary grass, smooth brome grass, tall fescue, timothy, chicory, really. And any warm season grass is not suitable for frequent close grazing. The only grass that you might get away with some frequent close grazing, and this is important for you to know in case you have no choice. Sometimes we don't have a choice and we got to make a sacrifice. If the only one that's suitable to frequent close grazing is a Kentucky bluegrass, which Kentucky bluegrass is a nice grass, but hard to manage because it's really drought intolerant. So it really needs maybe low-lying areas that have a lot of moisture. But honestly, out of all the grasses and legumes we use for grazing, the only one that's best suited for frequent close grazing is Kentucky bluegrass. But even that is going to take its toll on that grass.
And also you want to keep in mind the amount of moisture that's happening and the temperatures in the air. So Kentucky bluegrass is a cool season grass, so it's not something that's going to give you good forage in the heat of the summer. It's something that you're going to stick with for later. All right, and so if we're looking at doing a rotational grazing system, which I really think you need to look into, grasses that are highly suitable to rotational grazing would be bird's-foot trefoil, white Dutch clover, white ladino clover, and then your fistolium, your Kentucky bluegrass, your meadow fescue, orchard grass, perennial ryegrass, reed canary grass. You can see there's a whole lot more things that are going to be more resilient for a rotational grazing system. And again, you're going to be grazing down to 2 inches, no lower. Tall fescue, chicory, and then your warm season grasses, you cannot graze down to 2 inches. That's too short for them. You're looking at your switchgrass, your big blue stem, your Indian grass, and your eastern gamma grass. All of those are going to be highly suitable toward a rotational grazing system. Rotational grazing is much easier on your grasses. And again, each of those grasses has a better period for their primary production. So for instance, your cool season grasses, you're looking at spring, early summer, maybe fall, depending on how wet or dry it is. And then if you have a field that you know gets dry and hot, you really should look into having some warm season grasses in that mix, and they're going to be your summer grazing. You can do chicory in the summer as well, but it's not something that a lot of people grow for forage, but it does have a good nutritional value.
Yeah, those forbs, a lot of people, you either love it or hate it, and the ones that do love it, forbs and legumes are a great source of minerals. You know, not to say that you don't need a mineral supplement, but in terms of making sure your cattle are getting enough of all different types of minerals, magnesium and stuff like that. A lot of people like forages like Puna chicory, which is a grazing type chicory. But on that note, I can see we're kind of running low on time here. And just remember, take home message is, if you don't change your management style, any changes you make are going to be lost. So, think about the types of weeds you have, the type of grasses you have, the way you're managing for those, and then evaluate your program and decide whether changes need to occur or not. We're here to help you identify weeds, help you find some research-based information on what works and what doesn't work. And hopefully, if you do have the attitude to change your management style, we're here to help. So thank you for listening. And remember, you got to start thinking about the forage quality and your livestock year-round, starting now all the way to winter feeding.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.